Hey there, and welcome to Crazy Pepper, the channel where drama sizzles and revenge burns hotter than ever. If you love jaw dropping twists, bold characters, and stories that keep you guessing till the end, you're in the right place. Subscribe and dive into gripping tales of betrayal, karma, and ultimate payback. Get ready for unforgettable moments and satisfying endings, only on Crazy Pepper. Hit that bell and let the drama begin. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the Carter mansion as I nursed my third whiskey of the evening. Christmas Eve at my in-laws' place, where the eggnog flows like water and the passive-aggressive comments hit harder than the December wind rattling the windows. "Nick, we need to talk." Ben Carter's voice cut through the holiday chatter like a knife through wrapping paper, and my brother-in-law stood there in his perfectly pressed suit, CEO smile plastered across his face, flanked by his new girlfriend Madison, a 20-something blonde, who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. I set down my glass on the antique side table. "Sure, Ben, what's on your mind?" The living room fell silent except for the crackling fireplace. Emily, my wife of 8 years, shot me a warning look from across the room, where she stood with her usual crowd of corporate friends. Her dark hair was pulled back in that severe bun she wore to board meetings, and her red dress probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "You embarrassed Madison at the company party last week," Ben said, his voice carrying that entitled edge I'd grown to despise over the years. "Your comment about her extensive retail experience was completely inappropriate." I almost laughed. Madison had been bragging about her shopping habits to anyone who'd listen, and I'd made one dry observation about her expertise in spending other people's money. Apparently, that constituted a federal offense in the Carter family. "I was making conversation," I said, keeping my voice level. "If Madison took offense, that wasn't my intention." "Intention doesn't matter," Ben snapped. "Impact does. And the impact was that you made my girlfriend feel unwelcome at our family gathering." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Emily's father, Robert Carter Sr., shifted uncomfortably in his leather armchair. He'd built this company from nothing, and watching his son wield power like a spoiled child clearly didn't sit well with him. "So what exactly are you saying, Ben?" I asked. Ben's smile widened, and I saw the trap closing. "I'm saying your salary is suspended effective immediately. Your promotion to senior project manager is on indefinite hold. Until you apologize to Madison, publicly and sincerely. You're persona non grata at Carter Industries." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Emily's face had gone pale, but she didn't speak up. Not surprising, she'd been distant for months, working late, taking mysterious phone calls, spending weekends at the office with her team, especially with Victor Lane, the head of sales who looked like he'd stepped off a Men's Health cover. I looked around the room at the faces staring back at me. These people had been my family for nearly a decade. I'd worked my A off for Ben's company, bringing in projects, managing teams, making him look good to the board, and now he was flexing his muscles because his girlfriend couldn't handle a little workplace banter. "All right," I said. That was it. 2 words that seemed to deflate the tension in the room like a punctured balloon. Ben blinked, clearly expecting more of a fight. "All right," he repeated. "All right," I confirmed, picking up my whiskey and finishing it in one smooth gulp. The drive home was silent except for the GPS directions and Emily's occasional sighs. Our house in Riverside Heights looked picture perfect in the moonlight, colonial style, with the wraparound porch Emily had insisted on when we bought it 5 years ago. Back when things were good between us. Back when she actually talked to me about something other than schedules and logistics. "You handled that well," Emily said as we pulled into the garage. "Ben was being a complete A." "Was he?" I asked, hitting the garage door button. "Or was he just protecting his girlfriend from the big bad project manager?" Emily's jaw tightened. "Don't be sarcastic, Nick. This is serious. Ben controls your entire career." "My career." I turned off the engine and looked at her. "What about our marriage? When's the last time you defended me in front of your family? When's the last time you defended me at all?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Inside the house, I headed straight for my home office in the basement. Emily called down that she was going to bed, and I heard her footsteps on the stairs. By the time I fired up my laptop, the house was quiet except for the hum of the furnace. I opened my email and began typing. The report had been sitting in my drafts folder for 2 weeks, a detailed analysis of Ben's questionable business practices, his habit of using company funds for personal expenses, his tendency to promote based on personal relationships rather than merit. Nothing illegal, but plenty that would raise eyebrows with the board of directors. The email went to 3 recipients: Robert Carter Sr., the chairman of the board, Janet Morrison, the head of human resources, and David Kim, the company's chief financial officer. 3 people who actually gave a damn about the company's reputation and bottom line. Subject line: concerns regarding management practices and company culture. I hit send at 11:07 p.m. on Christmas Eve. By morning, my suitcases were packed and sitting by the front door. Emily stood in the kitchen doorway, still in her silk pajamas, holding a coffee mug like a shield. "Your transfer to the London office came through?" she said without looking at me. "Effective January 2nd. Full relocation package." I'd applied for the London position 6 months ago as a backup plan. Emily had talked me out of it then, said we needed to work on our marriage, said things would get better. Now it was her escape hatch. "Convenient timing," I said, shouldering my laptop bag. "Nick, we need to talk about—" The doorbell rang, cutting her off. Through the frosted glass, I could see Robert Carter Sr.'s distinctive silhouette. Emily's face went white. "Please tell me you didn't send it," she whispered. The doorbell rang again. I opened the door to find Robert standing on our porch, looking every one of his 72 years. Behind him, Ben's BMW sat in our driveway, engine running. "Morning, Robert," I said. "Merry Christmas." "Nick." He nodded grimly. "We need to discuss your email." Ben appeared behind his father, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell did you send them?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Send what?" The flat in Canary Wharf was everything I'd expected from corporate relocation housing. Sterile, efficient, and about as welcoming as a dentist's office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of London's financial district, all glass and steel reaching toward the gray January sky. The furniture looked like it had been selected by committee, and the walls were so white they practically glowed. I dropped my suitcase by the door and walked to the window. Somewhere across the Atlantic, Ben was probably still dealing with the fallout from my Christmas Eve email. Robert Carter Sr. had called an emergency board meeting for December 28th. By the time I'd boarded my flight to London, 3 major clients had already requested meetings to discuss recent concerns about company leadership. My phone buzzed with a text from Mick Sullivan, my former colleague, and the closest thing I had to a real friend at Carter Industries. "Ben's been in damage control mode all week. Janet Morrison's asking a lot of questions. You really stirred the hornet's nest." I typed back, "Good, how's the office morale?" "Tense. Emily's been working late every night. Victor's been keeping her company." There it was, the confirmation of what I'd suspected for months. While I'd been working 60-hour weeks and dealing with Ben's power trips, my wife had been finding comfort in the arms of Victor Lane. 6 feet of charm and ambition wrapped in expensive suits and gym-sculpted muscle. The London office of Carter Industries occupied 3 floors of a converted Victorian building in the heart of the financial district. My new boss, Margaret Thornton, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who ran the European operations with military precision. "Your reputation precedes you," she said during our first meeting, reviewing my file across her mahogany desk. "Robert Carter Sr. spoke very highly of your work. He also mentioned some recent complications with management back home." "You could say that," I replied. "Well, consider this a fresh start. We run things differently here. Merit matters more than family connections." The work was challenging, managing infrastructure projects across 3 countries, coordinating with teams in Frankfurt, Milan, and Dublin. It kept my mind occupied during the day, but the evenings were another story. The flat felt like a tomb, and the silence gave me too much time to think about Emily and Victor. 3 weeks into my London assignment, I found myself in the George, a pub near the office that catered to the financial crowd. The beer was good, the atmosphere was warm, and the bartender, a gruff Yorkshireman named Terry, had perfected the art of listening without judging. "You look like a man with woman troubles," Terry observed, sliding a pint of bitter across the bar. "That obvious? 20 years behind this bar, mate. I've seen it all." "What's her name?" "Emily, my wife. Soon to be ex-wife, I imagine." Terry nodded knowingly. "Let me guess. She found someone else while you were busy working your arse off to provide for her." "Something like that." "Classic story? What are you going to do about it?" I took a long pull from my pint and considered the question. What was I going to do about it? Emily had made her choice. She'd chosen Victor's attention over our marriage, chosen her brother's approval over her husband's dignity, chosen the easy path over the hard work of fixing what we'd broken. I'm going to make sure they both get exactly what they deserve, I said. Terry grinned. Now you're talking, but be smart about it. Revenge is a dish best served cold, as they say. The plans started forming that night as I walked back to my flat through the London drizzle. Emily and Victor thought they were safe, thought I was out of the picture, thought they could continue their affair without consequences. They were wrong. I spent the weekend researching Victor Lane's background. Social media made it easy. The man documented every aspect of his life like he was running for office. Gym selfies, expensive restaurant check-ins, photos from company events where he stood just a little too close to Emily. But it was his LinkedIn profile that gave me the ammunition I needed. Victor had embellished his resume significantly. His claimed MBA from Northwestern? Actually a certificate program? His supposed 5 years at Goldman Sachs? More like 18 months as a junior analyst and before he was quietly let go. His track record of record-breaking sales, mostly inherited accounts from his predecessor. I made copies of everything, cross-referenced dates and claims, built a comprehensive file on Victor's professional fabrications. Then I did the same for Ben, digging deeper into the financial irregularities I'd outlined in my Christmas Eve email. The beauty of modern technology is that information wants to be free. Corporate databases, social media, public records. It's all there if you know where to look and you're patient enough to connect the dots. By February, I had enough material to destroy both Ben and Victor professionally. But that felt too easy, too clean. I wanted them to feel the humiliation, the betrayal, the slow burn of watching their carefully constructed worlds crumble around them. The opportunity came in the form of an email from Janet Morrison in HR. Carter Industries was conducting a comprehensive review of all senior staff as part of their response to my Christmas Eve bombshell. They wanted to interview me via video conference about my observations of company culture and management practices. I appreciate you taking the time, Nick, Janet said when we connected over Skype. She was in her office back in Chicago, looking professional but tired. I know this situation has been difficult for everyone involved. I'm happy to help, I said. The company's reputation is important to me. Let's start with your observations about Ben Carter's management style. I spent an hour laying out specific examples of Ben's favoritism, his misuse of company resources, his tendency to make decisions based on personal relationships rather than business needs. Janet took detailed notes, asking follow-up questions that showed she was building a case. What about Victor Lane? She asked near the end of our call. You worked closely with the sales team. Any concerns there? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Victor's a complex case, I said carefully. He's charismatic, no question, but I have some concerns about his background claims and his professional conduct. Can you be more specific? I'd prefer to send you a detailed report. Some of this is sensitive, and I want to make sure I get the facts right. That night, I compiled everything I had on Victor into a professional-looking document. His resume discrepancies, his pattern of taking credit for other people's work, his habit of using company time and resources for personal activities. I even included screenshots of his social media posts that showed him at expensive restaurants and events during times when he'd claimed to be in client meetings. But I saved the best for last. Hidden in the metadata of Victor's own social media posts were location stamps that placed him at the same hotels and restaurants as Emily on multiple occasions when she'd told me she was working late or attending conferences. I didn't spell it out explicitly. I let the timestamps and locations speak for themselves. The report went to Janet Morrison with copies to Robert Carter Sr. and Margaret Thornton. Subject line, follow-up information regarding staff review. 3 days later, Mick texted me. Victor's been called in for a meeting with HR. Emily looks nervous. Something's happening. I smiled as I read the message. Phase 1 was complete. Victor's professional life was about to become very complicated, and Emily was going to find out that her affair wasn't as secret as she'd thought. But this was just the beginning. I had bigger plans for both of them. March in London brought longer days and the promise of spring, but my mood remained winter dark. The investigation back in Chicago was proceeding exactly as I'd hoped. Mick's daily updates painted a picture of an office in chaos, with Ben scrambling to explain his expense reports and Victor suddenly finding his sales figures under intense scrutiny. Janet Morrison's been interviewing everyone, Mick texted during one of our regular exchanges. She talked to me yesterday about Victor's client relationships, asked a lot of specific questions about his travel schedule and expense claims. What did you tell her? I replied. The truth, that Victor spends more time in the gym than with clients, and his biggest sale last year was inherited from Peterson before he retired. I was sitting in my office at the London branch, reviewing project timelines for a massive infrastructure contract in Germany. The work was engaging, but part of my mind was always focused on the situation back home. Margaret Thornton had been pleased with my performance, even hinting at a permanent position if I wanted to stay in London. But I wasn't ready to let go of Chicago yet. Not until I'd finished what I'd started. The next phase of my plan required more direct action. I booked a flight back to Chicago for the first week of April, ostensibly to handle some paperwork related to my relocation and to collect personal items from the house. Emily didn't know I was coming. I wanted the element of surprise. The flight from Heathrow to O'Hare gave me 8 hours to finalize my strategy. I'd learned from Mick that Victor and Emily had grown bolder in my absence, often leaving the office together for extended lunches and staying late for project meetings that never seemed to produce any actual work. Chicago looked exactly the same as I'd left it, but I felt like a different person walking through the terminal. 3 months of distance had given me clarity and purpose. I wasn't the same man who'd been humiliated at that Christmas Eve party. I rented a car instead of taking a taxi, wanting the mobility and anonymity. My first stop was a coffee shop across the street from Carter Industries' downtown headquarters. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the familiar bustle of my former workplace. At 12:30 p.m., right on schedule, Victor and Emily emerged from the building together. He was wearing one of his signature tailored suits, and she had on the blue dress I'd bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago. They walked close together, his hand briefly touching the small of her back as he guided her toward his red BMW. I followed them at a distance, my rental car blending into downtown traffic. They drove to Chez Laurent, an upscale French restaurant in River North. The same place Victor had taken 3 other women over the past year, according to his meticulously documented social media presence. I parked across the street and watched them through the restaurant's windows. They sat at a corner table, leaning toward each other in intimate conversation. Emily laughed at something Victor said, touching his hand across the table. It was the first time I'd seen her genuinely smile in months. The sight should have hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt a cold satisfaction. They were making this too easy. I spent the afternoon conducting surveillance, documenting their routine. After lunch, they returned to the office separately. Emily first, then Victor 15 minutes later. Classic affair behavior, trying to avoid suspicion through staggered arrivals. At 6 p.m., most of the office staff began filtering out of the building. Ben left in his silver Mercedes, probably heading home to Madison. The regular employees followed in waves, but Emily and Victor remained inside. At 7:30, they emerged together again, this time heading for the parking garage. I followed Victor's BMW to the Marriott downtown, where they disappeared into the lobby bar. I waited 30 minutes, then entered the hotel. The bar was dimly lit and crowded with business travelers and local professionals. I spotted Emily and Victor at a high-top table in the corner, drinks in hand, deep in conversation. I ordered a scotch at the bar and positioned myself where I could observe without being seen. They were discussing something serious. Emily looked worried, and Victor was speaking in low, urgent tones, probably talking about the HR investigation that was closing in on them. After an hour, they left the bar together and took the elevator upstairs. Room 1247, according to the floor indicator. I finished my drink and headed back to my rental car, my phone buzzing with a text from Mick. Ben called an all-hands meeting for tomorrow morning. Word is, Janet Morrison's going to make some announcements about the investigation results. Perfect timing. I texted it back. I'm in town. Want to grab dinner? You're here? Hell yes. Meet me at Murphy's at 8. Murphy's Pub was a dive bar near the office that catered to Carter Industries employees. Mick was already there when I arrived, nursing a beer and looking older than his 45 years. Nick, you son of a witch, he said, standing to shake my hand. You look good. London agrees with you. Thanks. You look like hell. Mick laughed. 3 months of Ben's panic management will do that to a man. He's been micromanaging everything, questioning every decision, trying
Tonight
to
we
prove he's
dive
a
into the
competent
science
leader.
and the
It's
magic behind the
exhausting.
northern lights.
We
What
found a corner
causes these
booth and
vibrant
ordered
green and
dinner.
purple colors to
Mick
dance
filled
across
me in
the
on the
sky?
office dynamics, how the investigation had created factions among the staff, how Victor had been increasingly defensive and aggressive, how Emily had been walking around like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Janet Morrison's been thorough, Mick said. She brought in external auditors to review the books, hired a forensic accountant to trace Ben's expenses, even had IT examine email and internet usage patterns. Find anything interesting? Oh, they found plenty. Ben's been using the company credit card for personal expenses, dinners with Madison, weekend trips, even her shopping sprees. And Victor, Mick shook his head. Let's just say his expense reports don't match his actual activities. What about Emily? Mick's expression grew uncomfortable. She's been cooperating with the investigation, but she's clearly nervous. There are rumors about her and Victor, but nothing official yet. Rumors have a way of becoming facts, I said. The next morning, I positioned myself in the coffee shop across from Carter Industries again, waiting for the all-hands meeting to begin. At 9 a.m. sharp, I could see employees gathering in the main conference room on the 15th floor. My phone rang. It was Robert Carter Sr. Nick, I heard you were in town. Can we meet? Of course. Where? My office? Now, if possible. There's something I need to discuss with you. Robert's corner office hadn't changed. Mahogany furniture, family photos, awards, and commendations covering the walls. But the man himself looked like he'd aged years in the past few months. Sit down, Nick. We need to talk about your email. I took the chair across from his desk. I hope it was helpful. Helpful? Robert laughed bitterly. It opened a can of worms that's going to take years to sort out. Ben's suspended pending a full investigation. The board's talking about removing him as CEO. I'm sorry to hear that. No, you're not. And you shouldn't be. My son has been running this company like his personal playground, and I've been too proud or too blind to see it. Robert leaned forward. But that's not why I called you here. He opened a file folder and spread several photographs across his desk. They showed Emily and Victor at various locations, the restaurant, the hotel bar, entering and leaving the Marriott together. A private investigator took these last week, Robert said. Janet Morrison hired him as part of the investigation into Victor's activities. She thought there might be additional misconduct beyond the financial irregularities. I studied the photos, keeping my expression neutral. I see. Emily's your wife, Nick. I wanted you to hear this from me before it becomes public. The investigation has uncovered evidence of an ongoing affair between her and Victor. It's going to come out in the final report. When? Today. Janet's announcing the results of the investigation this morning. Ben's out, Victor's fired, and Emily... Robert sighed. Emily's being transferred to a non-supervisory position. The board wanted to terminate her, but I convinced them that a demotion and final warning would be sufficient. I nodded slowly. I appreciate you looking out for her. She's still family, despite everything, but Nick, I want you to know that none of this changes my opinion of you. You're a good man who got caught in a bad situation. If you want to come back from London, there's a place for you here, a better position than you had before. Thank you, Robert. I'll consider it. As I left Robert's office, I could see the all-hands meeting breaking up on the 15th floor. Employees were filing out of the conference room, their faces showing a mixture of shock, satisfaction, and concern. Some were already on their phones, probably calling friends and family with the news. I took the elevator to the 15th floor and walked toward the conference room. Emily was still inside, sitting alone at the long table, staring at her hands. She looked up when I entered, her face pale with shock. Nick, what are you doing here? I came to collect some things from the house. I heard about the meeting. Emily's eyes filled with tears. They fired Victor. They demoted me. Everyone knows about... She couldn't finish the sentence. About your affair? She flinched at the word. It wasn't supposed to happen. It just... We were working together so much, and you were distant, and he made me feel... Special? Yes. I sat down across from her, studying the woman I'd been married to for 8 years. She looked smaller somehow,
Tonight we dive into the
diminished
science
by
and
the
the
weight of her
magic behind the
choices
northern
and their
lights.
consequences.
What causes these
What happens
vibrant
now?
green
She
and
asked.
purple colors to
Now
dance
you
across the
deal
sky?
with the consequences of your decisions, just like Ben has to deal with his, and Victor has to deal with his. Are you going to divorce me? I think that's probably for the best, don't you? Emily started crying then, quiet sobs that shook her shoulders. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But that part was overwhelmed by the cold satisfaction of seeing justice served. I stood up and walked toward the door. I'll have my lawyer contact yours about the divorce proceedings. You can keep the house. I won't be coming back to Chicago. Nick, wait. I turned back to her. I'm sorry, I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. I know you are, Emily. But sorry doesn't undo the damage. I left her sitting there in the empty conference room, crying for the life she'd thrown away. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed Victor's office. It was already being cleaned out, his personal belongings packed into cardboard boxes. The security guard looked up as I passed. Mr. Lane won't be needing these anymore, he said, gesturing to the boxes. Shame, really. He seemed like such a nice guy. Appearances can be deceiving, I replied. 6 months later, I was back in London permanently, having accepted Margaret Thornton's offer of a senior position managing European operations. The divorce had been finalized with minimal drama. Emily kept the house and half our savings. I kept my pension and my self-respect. It seemed like a fair trade. But life has a way of bringing the past back when you least expect it. I was having dinner at an upscale restaurant in Covent Garden with Sarah Mitchell, a brilliant architect I'd been seeing for the past 2 months, when I spotted a familiar face across the dining room. Victor Lane was sitting at a corner table, apparently on a date with a striking brunette who looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. You look like you've seen a ghost, Sarah said, following my gaze. Something like that. Excuse me for a moment. I walked to the men's room, pulling out my phone to text Mick. Is Victor in London? The reply came quickly. Yeah, he got a job with some investment firm there about a month ago, didn't you know? I hadn't known. After the dust settled at Carter Industries, I'd made a point of not following up on Victor or Emily's subsequent activities. I'd gotten my revenge, moved on with my life, and assumed they'd done the same. Apparently, Victor had other ideas. When I returned to the table, Sarah was checking her phone. I'm sorry, Nick, but I have to cut this short. Emergency at the construction site. One of the contractors is threatening to walk off the job. Of course, rain check? Definitely. She kissed my cheek and gathered her things. I'll call you tomorrow. After Sarah left, I found myself with a clear view of Victor's table. He was putting on quite a show for his date. Expensive wine, animated conversation, the full charm offensive I remembered from his days at Carter Industries. Some things never change. I paid my bill and left the restaurant, but instead of heading home, I found myself walking the streets of Covent Garden, thinking about unfinished business. Victor's presence in London felt like more than coincidence. The financial world was small, but not that small. The next morning, I did some research. Victor had indeed landed a position with Blackstone Capital, a mid-sized investment firm with offices in Canary Wharf. According to his LinkedIn profile, he was a senior investment advisor specializing in international markets. The same embellished language, the same inflated titles. More interesting was the company itself. Blackstone Capital was relatively new, founded 2 years ago by a group of former Goldman Sachs executives. They were aggressive, ambitious, and apparently not too concerned with thoroughly vetting their employees' backgrounds. I spent my lunch break walking through Canary Wharf, ostensibly getting some fresh air, but actually scouting the area around Blackstone's offices. At 1:15 p.m., Victor emerged from the building with 2 other men in expensive suits, heading toward a nearby restaurant. He looked good, tanned, fit, confident. The Victor Lane charm was in full effect as he laughed at something one of his companions said. Whatever consequences he'd faced at Carter Industries, he'd clearly bounced back. That evening, I called Mick from my flat. How's Emily doing? I asked after we'd caught up on office gossip. Better, I think. She's been keeping her head down, doing good work in her new position. Word is she's seeing someone, a lawyer from outside the company. Good for her. She asks about you sometimes. I think she feels guilty about how things ended. She should feel guilty, but I'm glad she's moving on. What about you? Seeing anyone? Actually, yes, her name's Sarah. She's an architect, brilliant, funny, nothing like Emily.
These vibrant green and
That's
purple
probably
colors
for the
that dance
best.
across the sky.
After hanging up with Mick, I poured myself a scotch and stood at my window, looking out at the London skyline. The conversation had crystallized something I'd been feeling since seeing Victor at the restaurant. My revenge in Chicago had been satisfying but incomplete. Victor had lost his job, faced some professional embarrassment, but he'd landed on his feet. He was back to his old tricks. probably lying to new employers, charming new women, leaving a trail of deception in his wake. The thought bothered me more than it should have. I'd moved on, built a new life, found someone who actually appreciated me. Victor's continued existence shouldn't matter, but it did. Over the next few weeks, I made it my business to learn everything I could about Victor's new life in London. He was renting an expensive flat in Shoreditch, driving a leased Porsche, and spending money like he was making twice what his salary probably was. His social media showed a steady stream of expensive dinners, weekend trips, and photos with different women. The pattern was familiar. Victor was running the same playbook he'd used in Chicago, just with a British accent around him. Then I discovered something interesting. Victor's date from the restaurant was Dr. Amanda Whitfield, a successful pediatric surgeon at Great Ormond Street Hospital. According to her social media, they'd been seeing each other for about 6 weeks. She was intelligent, accomplished, and completely smitten with Victor's charm. She was also recently divorced and worth approximately £3 million. The pieces clicked into place. Victor wasn't just starting over in London. He was upgrading. Emily had been practice. Amanda was the real target. A wealthy, successful woman who was vulnerable after her divorce and impressed by Victor's fabricated credentials and manufactured charm. I couldn't let that happen. The plan I developed was more subtle than my Chicago revenge, but potentially more devastating. Instead of exposing Victor's lies through official channels, I would let him expose himself. I started by creating a fake LinkedIn profile for a fictional headhunter named James Crawford, specializing in senior financial positions. The profile was professionally done, with a realistic background and connections to actual firms in the industry. Then I reached out to Victor with an irresistible offer, a senior vice president position at a prestigious investment firm in Geneva, with a salary nearly double what he was making at Blackstone Capital. The catch? The position required extensive background verification and reference checks. Victor took the bait immediately, responding within hours with enthusiasm about the opportunity, and we arranged a phone interview for the following week. During our conversation, Victor laid it on thick, embellishing his experience, inflating his achievements, claiming credit for deals he'd had minimal involvement in. I recorded everything, of course, using the software that was perfectly legal in the UK. This sounds like exactly what we're looking for, I told him as James Crawford. I'll need you to provide detailed documentation of your track record, client testimonials, performance reviews, verification of your educational credentials. Of course, Victor said smoothly. I'll have everything to you by the end of the week. What Victor sent me was a masterpiece of professional fiction. Forged performance reviews, fabricated client testimonials, even a fake transcript from Northwestern showing an MBA he'd never earned. It was exactly what I'd hoped for, enough rope for Victor to hang himself. But I didn't send the evidence to his current employer or to Dr. Whitfield. Instead, I waited for the perfect moment. That moment came 3 weeks later at the annual London Financial Services Awards ceremony. Blackstone Capital had been nominated for Emerging Firm of the Year, and Victor would be there, representing the company. Dr. Whitfield would be attending as his date, her first public appearance with Victor at a professional event. The ceremony was held at the Grosvenor House Hotel, a glittering affair attended by the cream of London's financial elite. I purchased a ticket through my company's membership in the Financial Services Association, ostensibly to network and represent our European operations. Sarah was out of town visiting family, so I attended alone, which suited my purposes perfectly. I needed to be mobile and focused for what I had planned. Victor looked resplendent in a custom tuxedo, working the room with his trademark charm. Dr. Whitfield was stunning in a silver evening gown, clearly proud to be on the arm of her successful boyfriend. They made a striking couple, exactly the kind of power pairing that London society photographers loved to capture. I spent the cocktail hour observing from a distance, nursing a single whiskey and positioning myself strategically around the ballroom. Victor was in his element, introducing Amanda to colleagues, telling stories about his supposed achievements, playing the role of the successful investment advisor. During dinner, I made my move. The ceremony included a networking break between the main course and dessert, when attendees were encouraged to mingle and exchange business cards. I approached Victor's table during this intermission, timing my arrival for when he was momentarily alone. Amanda had gone to the ladies' room, and his tablemates were networking elsewhere. Victor Lane, I said, extending my hand. Nick Carter. We worked together in Chicago. Victor's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, recognition, concern, and finally a forced smile. Nick, what a surprise. I didn't know you were in London. Transferred here permanently after the divorce. I'm managing European operations for Carter Industries now. That's great. Great for you. Victor's discomfort was palpable. How are things back in Chicago? Much better since the house cleaning. Ben's gone, of course. The company's actually functioning like a professional organization now. Victor's smile became more strained. Yes, well, that whole situation was unfortunate. Unfortunate for some people more than others. Amanda returned from the ladies' room at that moment, sliding gracefully into her chair beside Victor. She was even more beautiful up close. Intelligent eyes, confident bearing, the kind of woman who commanded respect in any room. Amanda, I'd like you to meet Nick Carter, Victor said, his voice carefully controlled. We used to work together in Chicago. Pleasure to meet you, Amanda said, shaking my hand. Victor's told me so much about his time in America. I'm sure he has, I replied. Victor was quite memorable at our company. Made quite an impression when he left. Nick works for Carter Industries, Victor said quickly. Different industry from what we do at Blackstone. Actually, we have more overlap than you might think, I said. I've been following Blackstone's work with interest. Impressive growth for such a young firm. Thank you, Amanda said. Victor's been instrumental in their expansion into new markets. I don't doubt it. Victor has a talent for creative solutions. The conversation continued for another few minutes, with Victor growing increasingly uncomfortable, while Amanda remained oblivious to the undercurrents. I kept my tone friendly and professional, but every comment carried a double meaning that Victor understood perfectly. When I excused myself to return to my table, Victor followed me. What are you doing here, Nick? He asked in a low voice. Attending a professional event, same as you. Don't play games with me. What do you want? I turned to face him fully. I want you to understand that actions have consequences, Victor. You destroyed my marriage, helped ruin my career in Chicago, and now you're here playing the same games with new sufferers. That's ancient history. Not for me, and not for Dr. Whitfield, once she learns who you really are. Victor's face hardened. Are you threatening me? I'm promising you, the truth has a way of coming out, Victor. Always. I walked away, leaving him standing there with a look of barely controlled panic. The rest of the evening proceeded normally. Awards were presented, speeches were made, networking continued. But I could see Victor's distraction, the way he kept glancing around the room, the forced nature of his interactions with Amanda. The real fireworks would come later. 3 days after the awards ceremony, I sent a carefully crafted email to Dr. Whitfield, not from my personal account, but from a temporary address I'd created for the purpose. The subject line read, Concerns about Victor Lane's background. The email was professional and respectful, expressing concern for her well-being and suggesting she might want to verify certain claims Victor had made about his background and career. I attached selected excerpts from the documentation Victor had provided to my fake headhunter persona, just enough to raise serious questions without revealing my role in obtaining them. I also sent copies of Victor's forged documents to Blackstone Capital's Human Resources Department, along with a note explaining that these had been submitted to a headhunter as part of a job application. Again, no mention of my involvement, just a concerned citizen reporting potential fraud. The response was swift and devastating. Mick texted me 2 days later. Did you hear about Victor? He got fired from his London job. Something about falsifying documents. I feigned ignorance. Really? What happened? Not sure of the details, but word is he got caught lying about his background. Again, some people never learn. Dr. Whitfield's social media told the rest of the story. The photos with Victor disappeared, replaced by posts about focusing on her career and spending time with friends. A week later, she shared an article about the importance of trust in relationships, with the comment, sometimes the most charming people are the most dangerous. Victor's own social media went dark. His LinkedIn profile was deleted, his Instagram account deactivated. The man who had built his life on projecting success and confidence had vanished from the digital world. I felt a deep satisfaction, but also a sense of closure. This wasn't about Emily anymore, or even about my marriage. This was about stopping a hunter from finding new sufferers, about ensuring that Victor's pattern of deception and manipulation finally caught up with him. But Victor, it turned out, wasn't finished with me either. 2 weeks after Victor's professional collapse, I was working late at the London office when security called to inform me that someone was asking for me in the lobby. It was nearly 9 p.m., and the building was mostly empty except for cleaning staff and a few dedicated workaholics. Says his name is Victor Lane, the security guard reported. Claims it's urgent business. I felt a familiar chill. Send him up to the 15th floor, conference room B. I chose the conference room deliberately, neutral territory, with security cameras and glass walls that would provide visibility from the hallway. Whatever Victor wanted to discuss, I wanted witnesses and documentation. Victor looked terrible when he arrived. His usual polished appearance was gone, replaced by wrinkled clothes, unshaven face, and the hollow eyes of a man who hadn't been sleeping well. The confident swagger had been replaced by barely contained desperation. "You destroyed my life," he said without preamble, closing the conference room door behind him. "I documented your lies," I replied calmly. "You destroyed your own life. Don't give me that sanctimonious BS. You orchestrated this whole thing. The fake headhunter, the email to Amanda, the
Tonight
tip to
we dive
Blackstone's
into the
HR
science
department.
and the magic
I know it
behind
was
the
you."
Northern Lights.
I gestured to the chair across from me.
Green and purple colors
"Sit down,
to dance
Victor.
across the sky.
You look like hell. I've lost everything, my job, my flat, Amanda. I'm facing potential criminal charges for document fraud. All because you couldn't let go of what happened in Chicago. What happened in Chicago was you fucking my wife and helping her brother destroy my career. What's happening now is karma." Victor slammed his fist on the conference table. Emily came to me. She was unhappy. She felt neglected. She needed someone who actually paid attention to her. I didn't seduce her. She seduced me. "And you were just an innocent sufferer? I was a man who saw an opportunity and took it. Just like you're doing now." I leaned back in my chair, studying Victor's face. The charm was completely gone now, replaced by raw anger and desperation. This was the real Victor Lane, not the polished professional or the smooth seducer, but a hunter backed into a corner. "The difference," I said, "is that my opportunity involves telling the truth. Yours involve creating lies." "The truth?" Victor laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about truth? Let me tell you some truth. Emily was planning to leave you anyway. She told me she'd been thinking about divorce for months before we got together. You were a boring, predictable husband who took her for granted. I just gave her an excuse to do what she already wanted to do." The words stung because there was probably some truth to them. Emily and I had been growing apart for years, and I had been focused more on work than on our marriage. But that didn't justify what they'd done. "Maybe so," I said, "but that's between Emily and me. You were just a catalyst. A catalyst who's now paying the price for your revenge fantasy. You're paying the price for your own choices, Victor. The forged documents, the lies to employers, the pattern of deception, that's all on you." Victor stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the London skyline. The city lights stretched out below us, a reminder of how high we were above the street. "I could ruin you too," he said without turning around. "I could tell Margaret Thornton about your little revenge scheme, provide evidence of your maltreatment campaign against me. You think your employers would appreciate knowing they've got a vindictive psychopath running their European operations?" "You could try," I agreed, "but you'd need evidence. And you'd need credibility. Right now, you have neither." Victor turned back to face me, and I saw something dangerous in his eyes. "I don't need evidence. I just need to plant enough doubt to make your life difficult." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. Unless you back off, unless you leave me alone to rebuild my life, I'm going to make yours a living hell." I stood up slowly, keeping my hands visible and my voice calm. "Victor, I think you should leave now. This conversation is over." "No, it's not." Victor moved closer, his hands clenched into fists. "You think you're so smart, so clever with your little schemes, but you're just a bitter ex-husband who can't let go of the past. And you're a con man who finally got caught." Victor lunged at me then, swinging wildly with his right fist. I'd been expecting it. The escalating anger, the desperation, the cornered animal lashing out. I stepped aside, letting his momentum carry him into the conference table. "Security!" I called out, knowing the cameras would have caught everything. Victor recovered quickly, turning to face me with homicide in his eyes. "You son of a witch!" He came at me again, this time more controlled, but still driven by rage. I grabbed a chair and used it to keep distance between us, backing toward the door. "This isn't going to solve anything, Victor. It's going to make me feel a hell of a lot better." The conference room door burst open as building security arrived. Two large men in uniform who quickly assessed the situation and moved to restrain Victor. "He
Tonight we
attacked
dive into
me,"
the science
Victor
and the
shouted
magic
as they
behind
grabbed
the
his
northern
arms.
lights.
"I want to
What
press
causes these
charges.
vibrant
The
green and
cameras will
purple
show
colors to
exactly
dance
what
across
happened,"
the
I said
sky?
calmly. I was defending myself. The security guards looked to me for direction. "Should we call the police, Mr. Carter?" I considered the question. Pressing charges would create a public record, potential media attention, complications for both our employers. It would also give Victor a platform to air his grievances, however unfounded. "No," I said finally. "Just to escort Mr. Lane from the building and make sure he doesn't come back." "You think this is over?" Victor called out as they dragged him toward the elevator. "You think you've won? This isn't over, Carter." The elevator doors closed, and silence returned to the 15th floor. I straightened my tie, collected my things, and headed home to my flat, feeling oddly anticlimactic about the confrontation I'd been expecting for weeks. But Victor was right about one thing: it wasn't over yet. The next morning brought an email from Margaret Thornton requesting an urgent meeting. I arrived at her office to find her reviewing what appeared to be a detailed report, her expression carefully neutral. "Sit down, Nick. We need to discuss a complaint that was filed against you yesterday evening." I took the chair across from her desk, maintaining my composure. "I assume this is about Victor Lane's visit to our offices." "Among other things." Margaret set down the report and looked at me directly. "Mr. Lane has accused you of conducting a systematic maltreatment campaign against him, including identity theft, fraud, and professional sabotage. He's provided what appears to be evidence of your involvement in his recent employment difficulties." "What kind of evidence?" "Email records, documentation of fake profiles created in your name, testimony from witnesses who can place you at events where Mr. Lane was present." Margaret leaned forward. "Nick, I need you to tell me exactly what's been going on." I spent the next hour providing a complete and honest account of my relationship with Victor, starting with the affair in Chicago and ending with the previous night's confrontation. I held nothing back. The investigation I'd conducted, the fake headhunter persona, the evidence I'd provided to his employers. Margaret listened without interruption, taking occasional notes. When I finished, she was quiet for several minutes. "You realize this puts me in a very difficult position," she said finally. "I understand. On one hand, you've been an exemplary employee here. Your work has been outstanding, your conduct professional, your results excellent. On the other hand, you've admitted to activities that could be construed as stalking and maltreatment. I prefer to think of it as justice. That's not your decision to make, Nick. We have legal systems for a reason. Legal systems that would have done nothing about Victor's pattern of deception and manipulation. How many other women would he have sufferized while lawyers debated the finer points of employment law?" Margaret sighed. "I understand your motivation, but I can't condone your methods. The company has a reputation to protect." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that we need to find a solution that protects both you and the firm. Victor Lane is demanding your termination and threatening legal action if we don't comply. And what do you think? I think Victor Lane is a con man who got caught, and you're a good man who made some questionable choices. But my opinion doesn't matter. The board's does." The meeting ended with Margaret promising to discuss the situation with the executive committee and provide me with their decision within 24 hours. I spent the rest of the day working normally, trying not to think about the possibility of losing another job because of Victor Lane. That evening, Sarah returned from her family visit. I met her at Heathrow, and during the drive back to London, I told her everything: the affair, the divorce, the revenge campaign, the confrontation with Victor, and the potential consequences for my career. "You did all that?" she asked when I finished. "Yes. And you never told me? I didn't want to burden you with my baggage from Chicago." Sarah was quiet for several minutes as we navigated London traffic. "I don't know whether to be impressed or terrified," she said finally. "What do you mean?" "Impressed that you were smart enough to pull it off, terrified that you're capable of that level of calculated revenge. Does it change how you feel about me?" "I don't know yet. Ask me tomorrow." The next morning, Margaret Thornton called me into her office again. This time, she wasn't alone. Robert Carter Sr. was there, having flown in from Chicago overnight. "Robert?" I said, genuinely surprised. "I didn't know you were coming to London." "Emergency trip," he replied grimly. "We need to discuss this situation with Victor Lane." Margaret gestured for me to sit. Robert has been briefed on the complaint against you. He has some additional information that changes the context significantly. Robert opened a briefcase and withdrew a thick file. After Victor filed his complaint, I had our legal team conduct a thorough investigation into his background and activities. What we found was illuminating. He spread several documents across Margaret's desk. Victor Lane has been running variations of this con for years. False credentials, fabricated references, patterns of targeting wealthy women in vulnerable situations. We found at least 3 other cases similar to what happened with Emily and Dr. Whitfield. I studied the documents, recognizing some of the same tactics Victor had used in Chicago and London. More importantly, Robert continued, we found evidence that Victor was planning to sue Carter Industries for wrongful termination and defamation. He was going to claim that your Christmas Eve email was motivated by knowledge of his affair with Emily, and that the company participated in a conspiracy to destroy his reputation. A shakedown, Margaret observed. Exactly. Victor Lane is a professional sufferer, as well as a professional con man. He creates situations where he can claim maltreatment or discrimination, then leverages those claims for financial settlements. Robert closed the file and looked at me directly. Your methods were unorthodox, Nick, but your instincts were correct. Victor Lane needed to be stopped. So what happens now? I asked. Now we turn the tables, Margaret said with a slight smile. Robert's legal team has prepared a comprehensive dossier on Victor's activities, including evidence of fraud, identity theft, and attempted extortion. They're presenting it to the Metropolitan Police this afternoon. And the complaint against me will be withdrawn once Victor realizes the position he's in, Robert said. Our lawyers are meeting with his lawyer this morning to discuss the situation. I suspect Mr. Lane will decide that relocating to another country would be in his best interests. 3 days later, Mick texted me with the final update. Victor's gone. Rumor is he left the country to avoid criminal charges. Emily heard he's in Thailand or somewhere like that. I was sitting in my office, looking out at the London skyline, when Sarah called. I've made my decision, she said without preamble, and I'm staying. But no more revenge campaigns, okay? I prefer my boyfriend slightly less vengeful.
These vibrant green
Deal.
and purple colors to
That
dance
evening, we
across
had dinner at the
sky?
same restaurant where I'd first spotted Victor with Dr. Whitfield. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it felt appropriate somehow, a closing of the circle, a return to normal life. Do you feel satisfied? Sarah asked over dessert. I feel complete, I said after thinking about it. Like I finished something that needed finishing. And Emily? Any regrets there? No. Emily made her choice. And she's dealing with the consequences. I hope she's learned from the experience. What about forgiveness? What about it? Aren't you supposed to forgive people who wrong you? Move on? Let go of anger? All that? I considered the question seriously. I think forgiveness is overrated. Justice is more important. Victor hurt people and would have continued hurting people if someone hadn't stopped him. Sometimes the world needs consequences more than it needs forgiveness. That's a pretty cold philosophy. Maybe, but it's honest. We finished dinner and walked through Covent Garden, past the restaurant where this final chapter had begun. The streets were busy with tourists and locals, people living their lives, pursuing their dreams, making their mistakes. Somewhere in Thailand, or wherever he'd fled, Victor Lane was probably planning his next con, targeting his next sufferer, spinning his next web of lies. But at least it wouldn't be in London, and at least Dr. Whitfield was safe. That felt like enough. 6 months later, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Emily was marrying the lawyer she'd been seeing, a man named David Chen, who seemed like a decent enough guy from his LinkedIn profile. The ceremony would be small, family only, at Robert Carter Sr.'s estate outside Chicago. I didn't respond to the invitation, but I did send a wedding gift, a crystal vase from Harrods with a note that read, "Wishing you both happiness and honesty in your marriage, Nick." It was the last communication I ever had with Emily Carter. 2 years later, Sarah and I were married in a small ceremony in the Cotswolds, surrounded by friends and colleagues from our London life. Robert Carter Sr. attended, having become something of a father figure to me in the absence of my own family. Margaret Thornton was there too, along with most of the European operations team. During the reception, Robert pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Any regrets about how things turned out?" he asked. "None," I said, watching Sarah laugh with her architect friends. "Everything worked out exactly as it should have. Even the messy parts?" especially the messy parts. Sometimes you have to break a few things to build something better. Robert raised his champagne glass. To building something better. To building something better.
Tonight
I
we
agreed.
dive into the science and
As
the
the evening
magic
wound
behind
down
the
and the
northern
guests began to
lights.
leave,
What causes
I found
these
myself
vibrant
thinking about
green
the
and purple
path that had
colors
led
to
me here.
dance across the sky?
The betrayal, the revenge, the consequences, the new beginning. It had been ugly and complicated and morally ambiguous, but it had been necessary. Victor Lane had taught me an important lesson. Sometimes good people have to do questionable things to stop bad people from doing terrible things. The world isn't fair, and justice doesn't always come through official channels. Sometimes you have to create your own justice. Sometimes revenge really is a dish best served cold. And sometimes, when you're patient and smart and willing to do what needs to be done, the bad guys actually lose and the good guys actually win. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's worth savoring. I looked across the garden at my new wife, surrounded by friends who cared about her, building a life based on honesty and mutual respect. This was what winning looked like. Not the destruction of your enemies, but the construction of something better in their place. Victor Lane was somewhere in the world, probably still running cons, still hurting people, still believing that charm and lies could substitute for character and integrity. But he wasn't my problem anymore. Emily was in Chicago, hopefully building an honest marriage with a decent man. Hopefully, having learned from her mistakes, she wasn't my problem anymore either. I was in London with a woman who loved me for who I actually was, not who she wanted me to be. I had a career that challenged me, friends who respected me, and a future that looked bright. The revenge was complete, but more importantly, the rebuilding was complete too. As Sarah and I drove away from our wedding reception toward our honeymoon in Scotland, she took my hand and squeezed it gently. "No more ghosts from Chicago?" she asked. "No more ghosts," I confirmed. And I meant it. The past was finally, completely, satisfyingly dead and buried.